Hello, this is In Focus on UATV. Moscow is driving itself into an inescapable trap. While the Kremlin desperately scrambles to finance its war machine, its internal foundations are rapidly collapsing. From a weaponized religion to a hemorrhaging defense industry, today we break down how strategic isolation and decisive actions are crippling Russia's military future. Desperation takes many forms. When a regime loses strategic rationale, it turns to fanaticism. The Russian Orthodox Church has effectively abandoned Christian ethics, replacing them with a state-sponsored cult of violence to justify aggressive war. But as Moscow turns faith into propaganda, its own citizens are walking away. Here is the report.
The Russian Orthodox Church has long since become an instrument of Kremlin propaganda. According to Ukraine's Center for Countering Disinformation under the National Security and Defense Council, statements by the Church's leadership have little in common with either spirituality or Christian ethics. Instead of preaching peace, the Russian Orthodox Church promotes war and violence.
A paradoxical situation has emerged. An organization that presents itself as a defender of traditional spiritual values and constantly contrasts Russians with the immoral West has for years cultivated a cult of weapons and violence among its millions of followers. From publication by Ukraine's Center for Countering Disinformation under the National Security and Defense Council on Telegram.
Recently, Patriarch Kirill described the creation of the Soviet Union's atomic bomb as the result of divine intervention. According to him, nuclear weapons supposedly saved the country from destruction, and their development took place under God's grace and mercy. Similar statements, however, are nothing new. In 2023, Kirill spoke of God's providence in the creation of nuclear weapons, and in 2024, he urged Russians not to fear either the atomic bomb or the possible end of the world.
They glorify the Soviet Union as a great homeland. They praise weapons of mass destruction. Yet one of Christianity's core commandments is, "Thou shalt not kill," along with preaching kindness, peace, humility, and turning the other cheek. In other words, Patriarch Kirill has effectively rewritten one of Christianity's fundamental principles to serve Putin's government.
The Russian Orthodox Church appears to have fully embraced its role as the ideological advocate of Russia's war against Ukraine. In Patriarch Kirill's new book, War, Beyond the Visible Causes and Consequences, Russia's military aggression is portrayed as part of an eternal struggle between good and evil. According to the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, peacemaking is a mistake and compromise is impossible. Notably, while presenting the book, the Church's publishing council stated that war gives purpose to Russia's existence and defines its so-called metaphysical frontiers. Experts say this effectively amounts to the creation of a new religious doctrine, in which war is elevated to the highest value and the very meaning of Russia's existence.
The Church is moving in exactly the same direction as the rest of the system. It has become complete devotion to a single supreme figure whom they have proclaimed as their ruler. They are following that course and have no intention of changing it. I believe the rhetoric will only become more radical. Soon Kirill may well declare a crusade, claiming there are now antichrists to fight in addition to the so-called fascists.
Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the militarization of church texts has become explicit. The Russian Orthodox Church has approved at least 12 prayers that justify Russia's military aggression. The most significant is a mandatory prayer asking for Russia's victory. Priests who refuse to read it are stripped of their clerical status and face persecution. At the same time, another trend has become increasingly evident. The more power the Kremlin grants the Russian Orthodox Church, the less influence the Church appears to have over Russian society.
The greater the Russian Orthodox Church's influence within the state system, the less influence it has over society itself. Recent opinion surveys show that fewer Russians attend church, fewer identify as believers, and many openly criticize the church hierarchy. Yet the state continues to provide the church with extensive resources and powers, creating the impression that it remains a powerful institution standing shoulder to shoulder with the authorities.
Despite its declining authority inside Russia, the Kremlin continues to use the Russian Orthodox Church abroad. According to former deputy head of Ukraine's defense intelligence, Ilya Pavlenko, all Russian Orthodox clergy serving abroad are either recruited by or connected to Russian intelligence services. Their primary missions in Europe, he says, are propaganda and espionage, reported by Nikita Skoblikov, UATV News.
Ideological collapse is only half the story. Economic strangulation is the other. The United States has expanded targeted sanctions against key Russian defense entities and supply networks. Concurrently, Ukraine is shutting down evasion schemes and enforcing tighter internal restrictions. Russia's military-industrial complex is facing a structural dead end.
The main missile and artillery directorate of the Russian Ministry of Defense, the Center for Material and Technical Support, the Directorate of Special Projects, and the ground forces of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation have been placed under U.S. sanctions. Restrictions were also imposed on 2 companies, Gideon Alpha and Invest Company, and 5 individuals. As explained by the U.S. State Department, the restrictions provide for a complete ban on any cooperation by American government structures with those on the sanctions list.
No department or agency of the U.S. government may procure or enter into any contract for the procurement of any goods, technology, or services from these foreign persons, except to the extent that the Secretary of State otherwise may determine. No department or agency of the U.S. government may provide any assistance to these foreign persons, and these persons shall not be eligible to participate in any assistance program of the U.S. government, except to the extent that the Secretary of State otherwise may determine. No U.S. government sales to these foreign persons of any item on the United States munitions list are permitted, and all sales to these persons of any defense articles, defense services, or design and construction services under the Arms Export Control Act are terminated, from a statement by the United States Department of State.
The day before, at a meeting with Ukrainian diplomats, President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky spoke about the need for sanctions against Russia to become much tougher. According to him, even in the 5th year of the full-scale war, there are still loopholes that allow enterprises producing missiles to obtain the necessary components and continue manufacturing weapons. Moreover, not only in Russia but also in North Korea. That is why closer coordination between partners is needed to make sanctions evasion impossible, the head of state is convinced.
There needs to be more coordination of this work, daily contact with our partners for the sake of sanctions, more synchronization of these sanctions. Sanctions need to be significantly strengthened against all natural and legal persons in the world, procurement networks, and financial institutions that help Russia buy and transfer critical components for the production of weapons. This is the weapon used against us. Most of these components come from Western countries. The same applies to the North Korean missiles that are being supplied to Russia, by the way, and these were fresh deliveries to North Korea.
Experts are convinced that responsibility should also extend to companies whose products reach enterprises of the Russian military-industrial complex through intermediaries. Kiev expects that the European Union will enshrine such norms in a new sanctions package or adopt a separate decision. This will force manufacturers to monitor the end recipient of their products more carefully.
Any company in any EU country that sells components used in the Russian missile-building industry, and not only the missile-building industry, for attacks on Ukraine, should think 3 times before selling such a part. And it should understand that when it sells something to someone and there is a risk that this part will end up in Russia, responsibility will then lie with that company.
In parallel with work to strengthen international sanctions pressure on the aggressor country, Ukraine is also expanding its own restrictions against the Russian military-industrial complex. 23 Russian companies that produce or supply components for Iskander-M ballistic missiles, air defense systems, drones, and other types of weapons have been placed under new Ukrainian sanctions. The list includes enterprises that manufacture rocket fuel, explosives, and optical systems. The Office of the President of Ukraine emphasized that the goal of the sanctions is to maximally complicate the work of the Russian military-industrial complex and reduce the aggressor's ability to produce weapons. Reported by Irina Yusupova, UATV News.
The trajectory is clear. No propaganda or illicit component networks can salvage Russia's failing campaign. Resilience, strong international partnerships, and decisive policy continue to redefine the battlefield. Thank you for watching In Focus. Subscribe to UATV English for objective analysis and clear updates straight from Ukraine. Stay informed, stay strong.